Right, this is the 22 shot magazine from the Dreamline, and it has a few problems. Well, mine does, and I can only assume that other people have the same problem. What seems to happen, and I'll try and demonstrate this, is that the actual spring in the middle that keeps the tension on the rotating mag on mine was wound up really tight, so it's putting a lot of pressure on the pellets. And this causes a lot of damage to the pellets. So what happens is when the probe, and I'm using an Allen key here, pushes a pellet out, when the probe is released and pulled back, the magazine rotates and then knocks that pellet against the end stop. Now if the spring is very powerfully wound up as mine is, or is, then when you pull the probe back, it clips around so much that it was actually damaging my pellet and making it into an oval shape and pushing it over to one side so it wasn't lined up with the hole. That's problem number one, which we'll come to. Problem number two is that when the probe pushes a pellet out, the magazine now has tried to rotate and is now pushing the next pellet up against the probe. Now, to demonstrate what happens next, I've got to turn the magazine on end, such that as the probe is pulled back, it actually pulls the pellet back up until it clips round. Okay, in this case it went all right. I'll do another one. So we push them out and we pull back. Now, I don't know if you can see on this one, what's happened is that it's pulled the pellet up, and into this top cover there's a recess cut, which I imagine is for a particularly long type of pellet, which in my case, and I guess the majority of people, we don't need. So again, we'll come to that in a moment. What happens is the pellet comes up, drops into this recess, so the skirt of the pellet now is above the rotating part and can go off at whatever angle it wants to. So I'll try and demonstrate this by I'll push it where it wants or not wants to go. So as you can see, I can just quite easily just move the pellet around. So you can end up with that ready for the next pellet. But obviously when your probe then comes in and pushes on that, it's going to damage it without fail. I'll just do that. There we are. You can actually see one there that I've just pushed through and pulled back. And in fact, it's completely buggered up, or not buggered up, but brought all the other ones up, or next two up, which are now jammed against it as well. So it's not really a good system. So there's two mods to do, which we'll come to now. So the first thing is, let me clear all these pellets out. As long as you're facing downwards, shooting at the ground right in front of you, it's not a problem. It's only when you start to come at an angle or you're shooting up that it starts, due to gravity, to pull the other pellet into the problem area. So we just get rid of these. You may see that there's a couple of yellow lines. That's something I've added, or added when I first had it, so you could see that when the two lines lined up, then there was no pellets left. All I did was cut a groove in the inner wheel, a bit of yellow paint, and on the Perspex cover underneath I did the same. As you'll see, they'll line up. But the mods we're going to do, that's not a requirement, but it's obviously something you can do yourself. So first thing to do is to remove the magazine. Is to remove the magazine cover, and then using an Allen key, and the size you'll need is a 2.5 key. Now you've got to go very careful here, because the area underneath there is two small springs and two small tiny steel balls that give you this clicking facility to hold it in place. The other side, there's a nut, and behind that nut is a rubber washer just to keep it tight. The actual silver part has got an Allen key hole in it, So the best thing to do is to squeeze there and hold that push down while you rotate. The nut can't turn because obviously it's in a recess in the body. So we'll go ahead and do that. So this is the first mod which you can do. At some point the nut will drop off, which it's done. This is where you have to be very careful and slowly you want to keep the wheel pressed and lift the plastic part up, giving it a wobble as you go. Not the easiest thing to get out. But if you do this on if you do this on a white sheet, then any parts you lose will get caught in the material. So as you come up, I expect you saw what happened then, the actual wheel will flick round. So we'll put him back where he was, because that was me talking and not concentrating on what I'm doing. Right, so holding the wheel down, we lift up that part. Oh, I seem to have lost my ball somewhere, so we'll come to that in a minute. That's the O-ring from underneath, and there's a spring. As you can see, a spring comes out of that hole. There's a spring in the other hole. And I've lost totally my two balls. We then take the wheel off. Now the wheel, as you can see, is held on a spring. So lift him up and then let him rotate round on his own. And you may have one or two turns on yours, but for me it's half a turn. That's what I'm looking for. So you take him out, you take the spring out, and there's my two balls. So I found those. I'll come to where those go in a moment. Right, so what we need to do is to only put a half a turn tension on the spring. The spring has a little tang there and a straight notch there. The tang, which you can see there sticking out, goes into, I'll point it out, if you look at this area here, there's a very small hole down in there. So we load the tang into that hole, so he's then firmly located in there. It's a bit fiddly, this particular job. And then if you hold where that is and the spring, so you've got the tang sticking up there, you need to put the tang, put it into the actual hole that is closest to the feed hole. If that makes sense. So it's a bit fiddly to do. So we've got that into the feed hole like that, and just push him down. You can make sure by looking on the other side that the actual bit of spring is poking through. So at this point there is no tension wound up on the spring, and the end stop with a little notch in this end is pointing 180 degrees away from the feed hole. You then rotate it anti-clockwise, keeping some pressure on, until you come to the end stop. We've now got to lift it up, over and down again without releasing the spring. To use a sharp implement to lift him up, as I'm doing there, and then rotate him round past the end stop and down again, and then hold him. You will now see we've got some tension. That's where we want it to stay. Right, so we now put him down. Right, then keeping pressure on the wheels, keeping pressure on the wheel and the outer holder, drop in the two springs, and then place the balls on top of each spring, as I've done there. And then while keeping some pressure on, have this part ready. Doesn't matter which way you go in to start with, but keep the keep the steel part pressed into the plastic and then into the top, into the hole. It's a tight fit. Push it firmly down. And then while keeping your finger in that position, turn the whole thing over, drop in the rubber O-ring, and then drop in the nut. And then keeping thumb on the nut and keeping pressure on the black part, start to screw it in. You'll feel it start to grip and it's starting to show through the nut on that side. Don't over tighten it, it just needs to be nipped up. You can feel when it's about right because you're compressing a rubber O-ring to the side of there. And you should be able to have free movement. So that's now released some of the pressure on the rotation. So then move on to the next modification. Now this particular part, as I said before, has a recess cut, as you can see, in that area there, which is obviously bigger than the skirt of the pellet. And what this can happen is that when the pellet gets too far up, it actually comes above the wheel there into the recess and can drop sideways. Or when it's in the locating point to be fired, it actually can kick in that direction like that. Now the method I come up with fixing that is to actually manufacture a new cover. So here's the new cover I've made. It's an exact copy of the original, but you can't see through it, unfortunately. And what I've done here is, if we turn them over, I've had to keep a small recess because there's a small pin that sticks up off of the rotating wheel, if you can see it there. I didn't want to go in and change part of the material that's given with it, although of course you could cut it off if you wanted to. So I've had to put a small groove all the way around to allow that pin to sit in it. But the groove is not big enough so that the pellet can't fall into that groove. So that's the change. I can supply these, and I'm supplying these covers at £5 each, including postage. So contact me below if you want one. So back to where we were. It's an exact copy. It will come with a rubber O-ring, so there's no need to take the one out, the old one. So the rubber O-ring will already be fitted. So it's a nice snug fit. Put it in the right place. So as per the original, it's a nice snug fit and locks in. So that's what you've got. So proof is in the pudding, as they say. So we'll load this one up. Obviously this takes a while, so I'll skip this video a bit to the end. Right, before I put the last few pellets in, the actual depth of pellet that you can use is 9.17, but with using their original one, which has got the recess in it, and that recess comes in at 1.2. So you can use a 10 with the plastic cover, you can use a 10mm length pellet, but with my modification, then your maximum size pellet is going to be about a 9.37, so you could say 9mm. So I'll continue on loading up. And some of these pellets may be damaged because I keep using the same ones. Right, so we're all in there. Drop the cover on, lock him in position, and we can see if we've made an improvement. So we'll turn them all upside down. So So I'll push out the first one and pull back. We can see the pellets lined up. Next one. Again, hold him upside down, worst case. Pellet is lined up. And then in the forward position, again upside down. And then that's the end. So as you can see, it is an improvement. Since using this part, I've had no lockups, or whatever the phrase is, no difficulty in pushing pellets down into the barrel. I hope this little article has been of interest to you. As I say, if you want one of these covers, just give me an email or a note on YouTube. And as I say, they're a £5. This is in the UK, obviously. They're a £5 each, including postage. They're 3D printed in PLA, so there's nothing fancy material there, but they do take me quite a while to print because they're quite dense material. So there's no real infill. Thank you very much for watching.